I'm just out of here. Out of here. I'm just over here
I'm out of here.
pontificating. I'm out
It's
of here
over already.
Well, stay spooky, guys. Got a jet. Oh,
2 seconds
God.
in.
Welcome,
I'm outta
everyone. I'm out of here. Welcome. I'm leaving. It is episode 37. Can you
Woohoo!
believe?
No, I
So
can't.
excited. Couple spooky
Mm-hmm.
bitches back here to talk to
Yep.
you guys about just some kind of like fringy folklore cultures. I mean, the
Yeah.
cultures aren't fringe, but I feel like
Mm-hmm.
they're not paranormal in nature. Well,
Right.
yours kind of is, but kind of not.
Kind of not.
I don't know.
Yeah. I
I'll
mean,
leave
a
it
little
to
bit.
you to tell us. How about that?
That sounds good. Am
I
I
think you go
first
first this
today?
week. Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, first thing, actually, though, I have an exciting announcement. Makes it sound more exciting than it is. But Dave, my boyfriend, he surprised me, and tonight we're going on a ghost tour at the Stanley
Stop.
Hotel.
Stop it.
I'm
Stop
so
it.
excited. And it's at 9 p.m., so it's going to be extra spooky at nighttime.
You were letting me talk on and on about my silly little gala event where I'm hoping to bag Drake, and you left this out? You
Well,
win.
I saved it for when we push
I
record,
respect
so
the
that
shit out of that.
everyone can be excited.
Wow. And you got an authentic reaction from me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That is
I'm so excited.
exciting.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
And
if it's allowed, and if it's not allowed, take photos, take videos. I need you in like peak psychic shape.
Okay. Yep.
If you guys could
I
see
can
me
do
right
that.
now, I'm making weird ears.
Antenna.
Antenna.
Yeah. I'll get another picture in that cutout, and maybe we can Photoshop your new face into
Honestly,
it.
yeah.
That was like 6 years ago or whatever.
It was a long time. It was a long time. Okay. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Hell
okay.
yeah.
I'm so pumped. Excited. Yeah.
I wish I could teleport.
I know. I wish too.
What an amazing gift. He gets you.
Yeah. Poor thing though, he doesn't even like ghosts or anything paranormal. Like it really freaks him out. So he's being very nice going with me.
It's a labor of love.
Yes. When you're with a spooky girl, you have to deal with it.
There's spooky consequences if you want to nag a spooky girl.
Spooky consequences.
You want to boink. I'm so sorry our parents are listening to this, but
cut it out.
I mean, they know the realities. Let's be honest. Okay,
anyway, let's move on before
spooky consequences
go too far.
Yes. Anyway, over to you, Amy.
Okay, here we go. All right, so today I'm talking about Druids and Druidism, I guess. That's their religion, for lack of a better word. And yeah, Druids have always been kind of mystical, kind of mysterious. And in their case, I think some of that mystery can be attributed to the fact that most of their teachings were oral rather than ever recorded in writing.
Okay.
So the accounts that we have of the Druids and their practices were mostly written by non-Druids. So that, of course, leaves gaps in the truth of their stories. And also, this was just forever ago, so things get lost to history.
Yeah.
And also another consideration with that is that these non-Druid recorders of the stories were watching and seeing what was happening through a Christian lens. So a few of the sources that I consulted for this cautioned about exaggeration in a lot of these accounts of what Druids were like, particularly when it comes to like their attitudes toward women, polytheism, and also just any of the darker parts of what they practiced. And yeah, just to start out, women they could be like the highest ranks, which was cool. They could get divorces from their husbands. Like they highlighted all these things where women were just totally equal. So that was one cool thing about Druids that I didn't realize. But anyway, so some people compare Druids to priests, but Druidic, I think that's a word, practices are much more based in the natural world than in the heavens or whatever we think of when we talk about priests in a traditional sense. And also, I think
Like
categorizing
Wiccans,
them.
kind of.
What was that?
Like Wiccans, kind of?
Yeah, a little bit. Definitely pagan. More, yeah, just nature oriented.
Girl power, though. Also.
Yeah, girl power,
Girl
nature power, magic, etc.
Magic, etc. Great.
Yeah. So, yeah, the Druid roles in their communities, they could be healers, teachers, fortune tellers, judges, and like in my opinion just straight up magicians sometimes. So no matter what they were really powerful and highly revered. So okay, anyway, just a little bit about how they became what they were. It looks like they were not born into being a druid, but they could be initiated into the role. And one source said that it took about 20 years to learn all of their lore, particularly because it had to be learned by heart and you could never write it down. And because of this insanely long learning process, there was also a hierarchy to their group, and they differentiated each other by the colors of the robes that they wore. So the eldest druid, who presumably completed all the 20 years of teachings, was deemed the wisest and wore gold robes. Then below them, the ordinary druids, they called them, would wear white, and they dealt with the day-to-day stuff within their communities. And then below them were the sacrificers, who sound like they were kind of like warriors, and they would wear red. But on the topic of sacrifice, yeah, exactly. Because on that topic, in that same vein, there are some records that seem to say that druids carried out human sacrifices, but a lot of sources contradict that. Or one said that druids would be present at the sacrifice because they were highly revered, but they would never do it themselves. They only did animal sacrifices,
so
etc.
Like in that theory, like they'd be present at other like pagan rituals that were not druidic.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
I can't remember what the exact name was. I should have written it down. It was something like Vates, Vates, or something. It was just some other subgroup of like pagan Celts. So, yeah. But then there was one source, which is worldhistory.org, that had a very detailed picture of what human sacrifices they might have performed. So I don't really know how you decide what to believe. But I do have information from that about human sacrifice. So
juicy.
Most often, these victims would be captured by, or would be enemy warriors that were captured by whoever was doing it, which is consistent with what this source said, that human sacrifices would only ever be carried out in times of really great need, like war or famine.
Oh, okay.
So that's where they would get these enemies, I guess. And then this source also talked about the remains of a possible human sacrifice. But again, that's controversial. Not everyone believes it. But He's known as the Lindau or Lindo man.
Mm.
So this is a real person that they found in a bog near Cheshire in England, or Cheshire. I'm not sure what they would say. But this Lindo man, he lived no later than the 1st or 2nd century, and he looks to have been killed in a manner that's standard with ritual killings.
Okay.
And especially, he also appeared to have been in good health when he died, so there was no reason for him to have died of natural consequences, as far as they can tell from the remains. So what happened to him sounds awful. He was hit on the head, strangled, and then the throat was cut. And then afterwards, the body would be placed in water before finally being buried. So that does not sound like an accident, that's for sure. So who knows who killed him, but could be a ritual sacrifice. But then this source also talks about sacrifices to specific gods. So, for example, there's one, and I'm going to butcher this name too, Tushates or something like that.
Okay.
Teutates. Teutates.
Tatates.
I don't know how they would say that in Gaelic, but anyway,
honestly, probably just like that.
Teutates. Yep. So he was god of the people, and anyone sacrificed in his honor would be drowned. Sacrifices to the god Asus, which just translates to Lord or Master. This is awful, would be hung from a tree and have their limbs ripped off of their bodies.
I was literally going to say I'm waiting for a Braveheart moment. I'm just waiting for a Braveheart moment, and there it is.
There it is. We reached it.
We reached it. Made it.
Yep. And then one last one to the god Tyrannus, which means thunderer. This one, I don't know what's worse. The victims of him would be placed in a hollow tree and burnt alive. So
that's like Midsummer. Did you ever watch that movie?
No.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah. No, I won't.
There's some of that kind of vibe in there, I would say.
Yeah. Yikes. Creepy.
In the building kind of thing.
Ugh, yeah. So there's that. Who knows if that was actually anything to do with Druids, but it's always interesting to think about
pagans.
How pagans. Yeah, and how much has changed. Like, hopefully that doesn't happen anymore. And how you could just
depths of the woods, man. You never know.
Yeah, you never know. But just thinking about, you could kill someone with no consequences, really.
Oh yeah,
it's wild. Just crazy.
Absolutely wild.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's pretty bonkers.
Yeah. All right. Then quickly to go back to that hierarchy. That was a total aside, but below the sacrificers were the bards, who wore blue, and they were known for their creativity and artistic tendencies. So they sound cool. And then any new initiates would wear brown or black. So, yeah. And then in addition to this social hierarchy, kind of everything for them was very organized, it seems, very structured, including their patterns of life and the celebrations that they held were always closely following nature's cycles, which in a previous episode we talked about Samhain, which falls on the same day as our modern day Halloween. And yeah, Samhain was actually the New Year celebration for the Druids, and it involved animal sacrifices, dressing up in costume, which is probably how we have that in our tradition today, and also fortune telling for the year ahead, which I think is really cool.
Love that energy.
And yeah, I really tried to find more information about how they, I guess, their methods of divination. Mm-hmm. And I found a list of what they would do, but I couldn't find any details. So this list I found said that they would watch bird flight patterns, observe animal behavior. They would divine things from the shapes of the clouds, look for images while gazing into the fire or pools of water, but no details about what that could tell them. So yeah, good for them for like sticking to their guns about not writing anything down, but
seriously,
it'd be great to know more about what they knew. So that's really cool. And then one last quick thing is that there are several sites that are thought to be where Druids would hold their rituals or hang out, I guess.
Hang out. Man, let's hang out.
Yep, including stone circles, things like that. I don't think Stonehenge is a Druidic site, but similar vibes. I don't know. Yeah, sure. Well, we don't know. No one wrote it down.
No.
Idiots. So, yeah, there are a few places, but I found one that I actually think is good cliffhanger for maybe another Haunted Places episode. I feel like I always do this. Where I'm like, sneak preview. But
bring it on.
It's called Wistman's Wood. And there's like a big boulder in there that's supposedly some part of a Druidic ritual, but then in this article that I read about it, there's like pack of hellhounds that's said to live there, like the devil, yeah, other ghosts. So
what's it called? Wistman's Wood?
It's called Wistman's Wood.
Okay, I'm adding it to our list. Wow.
Yeah, and I'm sure that if we talk about that, we'll give this disclaimer also, but Wistman's Wood, they have specifically on this website that for some reason the number of people visiting has like skyrocketed and it's causing irreparable damage. So if you go there, be respectful.
I wonder why that is. Interesting.
Yeah,
were they featured on like a Ghost Adventures episode or something?
Probably. Let's find out for next time because
that sounds good.
But also, it's absolutely beautiful. Like,
really?
I'm excited to read about it.
Maybe it's just like a tourism thing. Like people are just pumped.
It looks like
a beautiful place,
a very beautiful landscape. Like you'd find fairies in there for sure.
Landscape. Oh, for sure. I mean, if there are hellhounds, they're definitely fairies.
They coexist.
For sure. They do, for sure. I'm here for it.
Yeah. So that was all I had today. A very high level look at Druids, who are very cool. And I believe there's also still like modern practitioners of Druidism. Mm-hmm. So that could be another thing to look into.
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty cool.
I mean, there's so many people. I wonder if like how they, I mean, obviously like if you're Druidic, if that is a term, like then you know, in the same way, I guess someone would say they're like Catholic or whatever, mm-hmm. But I wonder if they also consider themselves to be witches.
Yeah. That's a good question.
It's got a very witchy vibe. I bet Reddit would have the answer to that. We can find out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about it next week.
Yes, for sure. So my topic for the week is a little bit more like traditional, I would say, but it has a bit of a twist. And there's a lot, well, I'll just say it's Jewish folklore. Mm-hmm. And I've learned a lot about Judaism just in like theology courses and stuff, but there's a lot I also didn't know or just haven't really like thought about, just about the Torah or the Bible and in general, and like the things that are really actually inherently magical about the stories there. So I'll start with just kind of like magic in Jewish literature. And when I say literature, I don't mean like, fiction. I mean, well,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it could be fiction, but I'm talking about like historical texts. So the Torah is full of supernatural, we'll call them acts. Some examples: manna raining down from heaven, barren women giving birth, animals speaking. But these events are all attributed to God. Thus, the supernatural happenings of the Israelites, whose source of power is God, are extolled. So in talking about like what is considered magic, which according to Judaism is like taboo, versus what is miraculous through God, like it's the source and the intent that matters most in terms of like what's allowed and what is not, or what's even praised and what is like feared and rejected.
Right.
So God parts the Red Sea as the Israelites flee Egypt. That's considered a miracle. So God is actually the one making miracles and allowing people or giving people the power through himself to or herself perform magical acts. So the Talmud is another source for a lot of like magical lore and is pretty like equally conflicted on the idea of like magic and the supernatural as the Torah is, which I think most people know this, but for anyone who doesn't know, for Christians listening, the Torah is quite literally just the Old Testament. So it's just the first half of the Bible, the Christian Bible. So the Talmud, rabbis from that period, which was around 70 to 640 CE, forbid some magic as being, quote, the ways of the Amorites, or these are people who inhabited Palestine before the Israelites. So there's obviously some political charge to that, so keep that in mind. But then describe other magical acts with awe and even pride. So, for example, in one story, a rabbi, Eliezer, gains prestige when his deep knowledge of Torah endows him with supernatural powers that enable him to prevent a house from collapsing. So there are it goes on and on to explain a bunch of different stories like that. But basically, there's like that side. And then on the other side, when another rabbi uses the same words to manufacture, so same words as another rabbi used to do something like beautiful and miraculous, whatever. He uses those same words to manufacture a golem, which we'll get into in a minute. His colleague turns it to dust because it cannot speak and therefore must be, quote, a dangerous creature of the magicians. So whether it's, these are all unusual events, right?
Yeah.
But like whether it's magic or a miracle depends on who does it and where their source of power is and like what's the purpose. So magic which calls on unseen forces. So this is like the kind of like descent, right? It's like God is an unseen force. So how is this any different from magic? And really, like, it doesn't differ from the common Jewish views of involvement of God by definition, and even like angels and demons, because those are a part of Judaism as well, those entities, we'll say. So getting into more of like magical creatures in Jewish texts and tradition, shedim is the Hebrew word for demons or also malevolent spirits. And like most people at this time in like pre-modern world, they're calling it, Jews believed that shedim were real and ubiquitous. One medieval census estimated the number of demons at somewhat more than one per person on Earth, which is kind of interesting that there would be a demon census. But I love it.
Oh, God. Yikes.
Yeah. There's a rabbi, Amitai Adler, who lectures on Jewish magic, explains that the belief in the prevalence of demons reflected a life replete with unexplained diseases and other threatening phenomena. So similar to how people in the Middle Ages believed in knocking on wood to deafen the fairies that would otherwise interfere with your wishes, like things like that. It's all just like people die and science has yet to explain why that happens. So it must be a demon or something evil interfering. Evil spirits were potentially everywhere. They were in dark corners. They were lurking at the dinner table to gather leftover crumbs. There are all sorts of like narratives that kind of have these different scenarios where demons are just present like all the time, basically. They were invisible, but interestingly, the Talmud gives explicit practical advice for how to deal with them. So,
wow.
So for a person, and this one actually creeped me out because this was used in a horror movie, but I mean, it makes logical sense. So I don't know that there's necessarily a connection, but for a person to see the demons that surround him, he should, not actually, let me skip ahead because it's not this part. Okay. So you could sprinkle ashes around your bed, and if demons are present, you'll see their footprints in the ashes the next morning.
Ooh, creepy.
The other one that I was about to read out of order was you take the this is a quote, take the afterbirth of a black she-cat, the offspring of a black she-cat, the firstborn of the firstborn, roast it, grind it up, and then put the powder in your eye. Like,
yikes.
Ew. Dude.
Wait, it was the firstborn of another firstborn.
Yeah, so the afterbirth
they're playing.
I know. So, it's like, you want to see a demon? You gotta breed cats.
2 years. Yeah.
I think a feline gestation period's pretty short, but I don't know how short. So take the afterbirth of a black she-cat, the offspring of a black she-cat, the firstborn of the firstborn. Yeah, so it's the afterbirth like from
3 generations.
Kitten of a kitten.
Yeah.
So weird. Wow. Anyway, I shouldn't say weird. Don't yuck their yum. Demon vision or whatever.
It's surprising.
It's just a little surprising. So that's like a little bit on magical creatures. And then if you talk about the practice of magic, that's like really closely aligned with Kabbalah or Kabbalah. I'm not sure where the emphasis is on which syllable. So we're just going to call it Kabbalah. In historical Judaism, it's a branch of the Jewish mystical tradition that concerns the use of magic. So it was considered to be permitted white magic, putting that in quotation marks, by practitioners, reserved only for the elite who could separate its spiritual source from this other kind of like dark magic, I guess, realms of evil. But this Kabbalah had to be performed under very specific circumstances that were thought to be holy. So again, it's like, are you drawing your source from God? If not, out of luck, you're SOL. As I said before, Judaism had a really strong line, though, between like what is miraculous and what is magic. And so as a result of these like very strong like rules and prohibitions around the use of magic, it never really took off as a major sect of Judaism, but it does still exist. They use things like amulets. They use sort of like incantations, like prayers, but almost more like spells. Just kind of interesting. But there's a lot of, there are some like modern practitioners. But yeah, it's just kind of an interesting little like side thing. 'Cause I've never met anybody who practices that kind of Judaism, or maybe I know some and they just don't advertise it, but it's just kind of interesting.
Madonna? I thought Madonna did that.
Probably. That seems like a Madonna kind of thing to do.
Yeah, it does.
So before I get into like some of the other like main headlines, just to kind of like tie the knot here. So the idea that Judaism doesn't really deal with the supernatural, because you don't think like of Jews being like, oh, like very woo-woo, like, or Catholics either for that matter. I'd say like they're quite similar in sort of their the public view, not of the church, but you know what I mean? Right. It all came from this movement, which is really the Jewish Enlightenment, called Haskalah, which looked down on the more supernatural elements of Judaism and kind of shifted focus to like God as the only source of miracles and power and things like that. So the biggest opposers, this I found to be really interesting. The biggest opposers to the Haskalah are the Hasidut. So in fact, so Hasidic, like Hasidic Jews, actually are the ones, their literature maintains the most magic and supernatural, evidence within the religion compared to any other sect of Judaism. So, very like fantastical Jewish beliefs in the Hasidic literature, which is kind of cool. Yeah. But like I said, like there are people across all sects of Judaism, but specifically, in the like Kabbalah kind of space, that still believe in the more supernatural things. They exist kind of across the board. It's more common in Israel than it is in the US, probably just because, it makes sense. It's, where everything stemmed from there. And there's a lot of traditions still there that didn't necessarily transfer over. So, so there's like a really strong belief in talisman. So if you think about like the mezuzah at the entrance of a Jewish home, or, there are tons of things like that, a menorah. Like I think most religions and even cultures have a strong sense of like a talisman, like the crucifix for Christians, or, having a Buddha or like some sort of altar or things like that. But there are some really interesting ones that are more like amulets and things you think of more as being kind of witchy than religious. Blessings, of course, by rabbis, supernatural protection gained by following mitzvot. So lots of like tradition that in turn protects you. So if you think about like Passover traditions and things like that. The evil eye is a very popular talisman. Praying on the graves of tzaddikim, which I don't know what that is, but praying over a grave of some specific person or persons. They believe in ghosts and they believe in divine intervention, of course. Okay. So one last little like small note on that is there are actually educators today, I found just in looking through like to find an equivalent for like, they believe in demons, which also can be referred to as Dybbuk. But do they believe in like demon possession, like exorcism and things like that in the way the Catholic Church does? And there was actually this would have been in 2015. There was a lecture at Concordia University, which is in Montreal, by a professor, Annie Ross, that was on Jewish Dybbuk spirit possession, like a full lecture on it. Wow. Yeah, and it was titled Diagnosing the Dybbuk, Women, Judaism, and Spirit Possession. So I was like, I couldn't find any more information about it because that sounds so interesting.
Yeah, it does.
But the little like subheading in it was Ross will be sharing some of her research on the phenomenon of spirit possession within the Jewish tradition. So clearly, it exists, or it's believed to exist still today if she's researching her experience with it. So anyway, I thought that was super interesting.
That is cool.
So yeah. So two other things I wanted to get into. So one that I referred to previously is a golem. So this is not like Lord of the Rings golem.
Yeah, but that's all I'm picturing.
I know. They don't look like that. They look like normal-ish people. But basically, it's a really common image in Jewish folklore that's basically something like inanimate, endowed with life. And it's usually made of clay traditionally. So the term is used in Psalms and also in the Bible and also in Talmudic literature to refer to an embryonic or incomplete substance that is like given life, essentially. So it's likely or assumed that the connotation today, the connotation in the Middle Ages came from all these legends that would come from wise men bringing effigies to life. So it's kind of that idea, which also is kind of witchy, like sort of voodoo vibes. So it's kind of interesting. So the way that this would happen is, the use of a charm or a combination of letters, which would form a sacred word or one of the names of God, which, for anyone who's unfamiliar with Judaism, God, or Yahweh, which is like it's spelled differently in Hebrew, but like Yahweh usually can't be written. And to some Jews, it's like absolutely not okay to say. Sorry, should have content warning.
Disclaimer. Yeah.
Sorry, small disclaimer. But so like there would be sacred words that, or like the name of God, it would be like something very like so they don't just say it lightly. It would be
Voldemort.
Literally Voldemort. So the letters written on paper would then be placed in the golem's mouth or affixed to its head. And that is what would animate the golem. And then the removal of those letters would then deanimate the golem. In early tales or accounts of golems, the golem was usually a perfect servant, his only fault being a little too literal or mechanical in terms of like his master's duties fulfillment. So lots of like kind of mistakes and things like that because they just are so literal because they're not human. So in the 16th century, the golem acquired the character of protector of the Jews in time of persecution, but also had a more like frightening kind of monster sort of aspect to it. The most famous tale involves the golem created by the 16th century rabbi Judah Lo ben Bezalel of Prague, and it was the basis for a novel that was then written in 1915, and also a classic German silent film, which obviously I have not seen, both of which are German. And so it actually was what kind of like that film and book. It's not that the book inspired Frankenstein, the writing of it, but it inspired how they brought Frankenstein to life, like how they executed the movie Frankenstein. So it's kind of interesting. So there are lots of famous golems throughout history, and it makes sense that like Jews have been persecuted basically throughout all of history. And so even pre-Holocaust, this was something that, they thought of these golems as like the protectors of the Jewish people kind of at all costs. And I sort of wonder if Inglourious Bastards, that movie, did you ever see that?
I did. Yeah, it was good.
The bear, do you remember that character, that like Jew who was huge and would just like literally murder Nazis? That's not a spoiler, by the way, and also that movie's old. So
yeah, it is.
If you haven't seen it, see it.
It's not our fault.
But I always kind of, the second like his character was introduced, I was thinking like, oh, it's kind of like a golem. And the only reason why I knew what a golem was is because I was so into like Charmed and all these like So
no, I remember.
Anyway,
that.
Kind of interesting. So the last thing I'll talk about is a Dybbuk. So it's spelled either D-I or D-Y-B-B-U-K. Plural is Dybbukim. So I'm just going to say Dybbuk because I'm going to get tripped up on that. It comes up in Jewish folklore a lot. It's a disembodied human spirit that, because of former sins, wanders restlessly until it finds a haven in the body of a living person. So sometimes they're thought to be kind of demonic, but they're not demons. Like they were human at one point, but it seems like I've just been kind of corrupted. So the belief in these kinds of spirits super prevalent in 16th to 17th century Eastern Europe. Often individuals suffering from nervous or mental disorders were taken to a miracle-working rabbi who alone, it was believed, could expel the harmful Dybbuk through a religious rite of exorcism. So they did perform exorcisms,
Interesting.
at least back then. I don't know modern day if that still occurs. And there's more like history too that I just don't actually think is all that interesting or like pertinent here necessarily. But the history of the Dybbuk goes very deep, and there's a clear source as to like where, like for example, in Catholicism, there's the belief that when you eat the bread and drink the wine, that it is literally the body and blood of Jesus. It's not just a symbol; it is those things. We can trace that back in history to like where that belief began. Same here. It's like they know exactly like which rabbi and which, scholar thought that this was a thing based on how like the function of a soul basically, and like what happens after death and all of that. So it's really actually quite interesting.
Yeah.
And to leave us on a spooky note, because you gotta.
We have to.
Yeah, we have to. So I wanted to talk about the Dybbuk box, which has come up a bunch in other podcasts and like throughout other research in previous episodes too. So the story of the Dybbuk box, and I'll get into it in a second, actually inspired a horror film called The Possession from 2012. And I had no idea that even existed. So it's like top of my list right now to watch. But basically, and we'll include a photo of it on our Instagram, it is a wine cabinet that is claimed to be haunted by a Dybbuk. And so the box gained notoriety first when it was auctioned off on eBay by the owner at the time, Kevin McManus, who told a story about Jewish Holocaust survivors and all these like paranormal claims as part of the eBay item description. So it's something that like potentially he made up, maybe didn't, but like people have, this brings us back to the question of like, if you believe it, does that make it real?
Right.
And so for example, like Post Malone, randomly, the rapper, associated with the Dybbuk box because there's a museum, I guess we'll call it now, that houses the box. And he went and visited the museum. And if you touch the box, the Dybbuk basically like puts its print on you. And I guess he was in a plane crash like later that day or the next day. And he's like, it was the Dybbuk box, like 100%. And almost everybody who comes into contact with it is like, it's bad news, like bad news.
Wow.
So the way the story goes is that the box belonged to an old woman who was a Holocaust survivor, who was a child at the time of the Holocaust. And after her death, it was something that while living, she would not let anyone near. And at the time of her death, she left it to, I think, her daughter or her granddaughter, some relative who was like, this is beautiful. I'm going to use this. It's kind of old, but like, it's cool. And it had a lot of history. Like, I think it packaged, according to the story, it held basically all the belongings that they had when they left Europe and came to the US. Potentially including an evil spirit. That part's not great.
Yeah.
But there are a bunch of weird things that have happened with this thing. I'm just trying to get back to this. So Manus, who originally came up with the story, says the box was my creation. I'm a creative writer. I made up the story. But it doesn't actually explain some of the other things that have happened. Like basically everyone who's come into contact with this, like goes bankrupt. Like, it's almost like the lottery curse. Like, it's like they go bankrupt, or their plane crashes, or they get in a horrible car accident. Like, I think people have died, according to what I read. That's not 100% confirmed, but like, there have definitely been injuries, and like really weird things happen around this Dybbuk box. So it's almost like, and some of those people too weren't people who knew of the legend before. Like, you buy it off someone and then whatever. Because Kevin Mannis wasn't the first owner. It came from somebody else before that. And I think they got rid of it because of some weird thing. And then I think he developed the story, having been inspired by maybe a pseudo-real spooky story. Right. So anyway, just around and around, but it's really interesting. And the museum, I guess, where it lives now, is owned by Zach Bagans, who's the lead ghost adventurer. So
of course, all roads lead to Zach Bagans.
Yeah, exactly. And 2018 was when Post Malone had the run-in with it, and then got in his plane crash. So Post Malone's fine, by the way, for any Post Malone stands, which I'm sure you know that. It's been 4 years. But anyway, so really creepy. But the one thing that people have called out, like particularly people who've focused on like the study of Dybbuks and spirit possession within Judaism and Jewish lore, is the fact that a Dybbuk probably wouldn't actually get in a box. Like, it would be looking for a person to occupy their body, not a box. But then again, it's almost like, well, what if somebody trapped it in the box? Like, kind of Jesus style, you know?
Yeah, it could happen.
Yeah, and there's a book that I came across that was called Dybbuk and the Jinni, which reminded me of the Jinn, like the Japanese Jinn. And so, I don't know, they sound really similar to me, honestly, in some ways, almost like a cross between like one of those like hungry spirits, hungry ghosts in Japanese culture, and a Jinn. So there's a ton of commonality. And then this, you know, the question obviously around like, if you believe it, does that make it real? But then also, how is it that all these cultures come up with the same concept over and over again, and they're all not real? Like, I don't know. I guess it's just logical when you're faced with like mortality and existentialism and stuff, but I don't know. It seems a little sus to me.
Yeah, no. I ask myself that question, it feels like every week when we do research for this. Because it happens over and over that people have the same sort of creatures or whatever it might be.
Skinwalkers and all that.
Yeah, because even if they didn't actually exist, that's still interesting to think about, the connection that we all have, and that we fear the same things, regardless of where we are.
Cultures and that's so
kind of cool. Wow.
Oh man.
That's very interesting.
Jewish folklore. This was definitely a more like informational, less spooky one. So we'll be sure to turn up the spook for next week. But I thought this was interesting though. Like the Dybbuk box just like really creeped me out when I heard about it on another podcast. And they really went into the original story that Kevin Mannis made up and like sold it as a real story, but it wasn't. So I didn't want to like go into it too much, but if you're interested in it, you can easily search it and it'll come up.
Interesting.
Because it's clever. And it was literally like a ploy to sell the box on eBay. Yeah. Like, he was like, I bet people will want it if they think it's haunted. So really clever.
Clever. Yeah. Now it's taken off. That's so funny.
Exactly. So please be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Girls Gone Spooky, and stay spooky, friends. We'll see you next week.
Stay spooky. Bye.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.